Good morning, good afternoon, good evening from wherever you're joining us around the world to the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs Daily War Room update. We're in day 18 of the war with the homicidal Hamas ISIS terrorists and their other terrorist friends in the Gaza Strip. We'll just give as we do every day, just give that same recap of what started this all, how we got to where we are, and where we're standing at the moment on the different fronts. So we're talking about a massacre that started on the 7th of October, the morning of the 7th of October. It was Shabbat, it was Simchat Torah, it was a Jewish festival and a Jewish day of rest, and some 3,000 terrorists invaded from Gaza and infiltrated and overran 30 different Israeli settlements, villages, towns, even kibbutzim along the Gaza border. There they went on a rampage, massacring, butchering people. I apologize for the descriptions. They raped women, decapitated babies. They killed 260 people at a nature party. They raped, they pillaged, and they did that for many, many hours. As a result of the actions of that morning, over 1,400 people were murdered. Another 250 odd have been taken hostage, according to the estimates. Yesterday, the update was another one that had been confirmed to 223. As of today, it's now 225 people who are confirmed to have been kidnapped to Gaza, but their number keeps on going up as there are more and more confirmations coming in. We also have some 5,000 people who were injured, some of them still fighting for their lives in hospital at the moment. In that whole general context, the terrorists from Gaza have now fired over 7,860 missiles and rockets into Israel. It's an unprecedented amount in such a few days. Just this afternoon, they were again shooting at Israel's coastal plain, at Israel's large cities. As a result of these bombardments, there are, just from the southern area, there are some 120,000 people internally displaced in Israel. And there are many people who, just to give you a description of life at the moment in Israel, schools are predominantly not working. Most businesses are not working. Restaurants are closed in the evening. People are generally trying to stay close to their to bomb shelters. And as we're seeing this come into a daily routine, so some schools are opening up as they become more equipped to deal with the security situation, ensuring that all the bomb shelters are sufficient to cater to all the kids that are there. That's the situation from the side of the terrorists attacking us. They keep on fighting every day. In the Gaza Strip, Israel is continuing its bombardment of the terrorist assets, sites, facilities, and personnel. As of yesterday, as we reported, there have been some 10,000 strikes within Gaza by the IDF. Within that context as well, yesterday we saw something which was a little bit more aggressive on the ground as well. A little bit of a ground incursion into Gaza that was reported by the IDF, specific strategic applications that we won't obviously expound upon, but that's generally what's going on in the south as regards the alleged humanitarian situation of the Gazan civilians. There we're seeing more and more occurrences of Hamas literally blocking the path of the Gazans fleeing north of Gaza. Israel, as we know, put out a general warning saying to all the innocent civilians in the north of Gaza, leave now, go south. Today, the IDF released a recording of a discussion between an IDF intelligence officer and a Gazan civilian, where the Israeli intelligence officer is saying to him, we are recommending that you move south. Your position is in danger because of the presence of terror assets. And he is saying to them, we cannot move south because the Hamas has put up roadblocks preventing people going south. the intelligence officer asks, well, what does that mean, a roadblock? And the Gazan says the Hamas terrorists are shooting people who try to move south. These are obviously the victims of this crisis, the victims of this war that no one will truly report upon, definitely not the UN organizations that are reliant entirely on the Gazan Ministry of Health, which is really just a branch of Hamas and is an integral part of putting out that false propaganda. In the south, whilst we saw many complaints of in the initial days and in the following week of hospitals are running out immediately of electricity and are out of power, we're seeing that those hospitals are still operating and they still have power. Hamas still, as we already noted previously, has huge stockpiles of fuel that can be used to power those hospitals, as Yoni mentioned yesterday. Just to put it into context and what's going on. Many of the hostages taken, we know, were taken into Hamas's underground network. This entire underground city that's been built 100 kilometers in length underneath the Gazan Strip. There, the hostages are being held in order to power the ventilation systems in those massive areas where Hamas isn't only holding its our hostages, but is also has its stockpiles of weapons and is also hiding also its forces. They need that fuel in order to support their war effort, and so they are reluctant, obviously, to give it over to the hospitals to keep on providing for the humanitarian needs of the Gazans, and they are specifically and intentionally using and abusing the international community to spread this idea of the crisis and the humanitarian crisis in Gaza as a way to stockpile their own fuel in order to keep on fighting Israel. So that's the update of what's going on at the moment. The Egyptians are still refusing to open the Egyptian border to allow the Gazans to flee into Egypt. And so we still have that situation where some humanitarian aid is going through the Rafah crossing, the border between Gaza and Egypt, but again the border is still closed. On the northern front with Hezbollah, the tit for tat has continued on. Hezbollah in the last 2 weeks, 14, 15 days, since they started entering and supporting the Gazan ISIS terrorists, have lost 49 terrorists who have been killed by Israeli forces and Israeli attacks. We've seen continuing attacks from Syria as well. Hamas, Hezbollah forces in both Lebanon and Syria firing rockets. The one little update that I owe you from yesterday is that the missile that was fired towards Akko was not fired, according to the IDF, from Lebanon, but was rather fired by Hamas, another one of their demonstrations of their capabilities and their longer range weapons. In Judea and Samaria, the arrest and the IDF activity continues on. The IDF has now arrested over 1,000 terrorists in Judea and Samaria since the 7th of October. Hamas has a substantial presence in Judea and Samaria, and we're not just fighting Hamas in Gaza, we're fighting Hamas as a ISIS terrorist organization all over, including in Judea and Samaria. Further off, as we look around, the Iranians are continuing their influence and trying to push their proxies into action. We saw another expression of that yesterday with a meeting of Hassan Nasrallah, the head of Hezbollah, together with representatives of Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad in Lebanon. He's hiding there in his little bunkers, as he has been since 2006. So that's the general update. I'm joined today by our expert, Yoni Ben Menachem. We were also hoping that that our very own Brigadier General Yossi Kupavasa would also be with us. Unfortunately, he was called away to an urgent consultation. He will hopefully join us a little bit later on, but at the moment we're not sure. So we apologize for that. Obviously, the discussion that we were going to have with him on on the Palestinian narrative to an extent. I hope that Yoni will also be able to fill us in. And what's going to happen in the day after is a subject which will be relevant also in the coming days, and possibly we'll be able to touch on that maybe during next week. Yoni, updates from your side.
Well, I would say that if I give an overlook of all what is happening in the Arab world, and especially in Gaza, the main issue that the Palestinians are interested in, I'm talking about Palestinians in Gaza and in the Judea and Samaria, and also the Arab world, the main issue is whether there's going to be an Israeli invasion, a military invasion into Gaza in order to fulfill the task of destroying the military infrastructure of Hamas and killing the military leadership and topple the Hamas regime in Gaza. This is the main issue, the main interest of all the Palestinians and the Arabs in the Middle East. What is going to happen? And I think that the Palestinians in Gaza fear very much this possibility. They fear that Israel will succeed in the mission, and this will bring their deportation from Gaza into Sinai, and they will have another Nakba, another catastrophe, as they call it in Arabic, Nakba, similar to the one they had in 1948. And last night, as you mentioned, Maurice, there was a military incursion, Israeli military incursion into Gaza, and this caused a lot of panic among the Palestinians. They were sure that the Israeli invasion started, and they started calling Hamas leadership abroad, and they were very worried. Hamas was very worried, Hamas in Gaza Strip. This is very important. What happened last night, this Israeli incursion into Gaza is very important because on one hand, it gives self-confidence to the Israeli soldiers that they can invade and go into Gaza without no fear, and the army is strong. And on the other hand, it's some sort of a deterrence for the Palestinians to show them that Israel can enter Gaza whenever it wants and fulfill the orders of the political echelon. This is the main issue.
The advantage, the additional benefit there is to go in, get them all thinking that this is the time that the invasion is going to start, and then to pull out again and to keep them waiting all the time. I think that's also part of the strategy of the bomb.
Right. It's some sort of a psychological war, and I can tell you and assure you that if the Palestinians are also watching this Zoom or video that we're making now, they can be sure there will be more incursions in the coming days, and there will be in different levels of incursions, small incursions, maybe big incursions, and in different areas of the Gaza Strip. The IDF is determined to go into Gaza and destroy the infrastructure of Hamas. And we heard last night the announcement of Prime Minister Netanyahu, who assured us, the people of Israel, that he is sticking to its original plan to go and topple the Hamas regime in Gaza and destroy all the military infrastructure. I'm going to tell you an anecdote. How do I see this panic not only among the Palestinians but also among the Arab countries surrounding us? I go every day, as you know, Maurice. I go to interviews on many Arab television stations, and this morning I had 2 interviews, and of course the main issue was: is there going to be an Israeli military invasion into Gaza? And they tried to persuade me that it's not going to happen, that it's going to, it's a psychological warfare, and Israel will not dare to go into Gaza because then it will have a lot of casualties, and the IDF will only have more casualties and will go into a big trouble in Gaza. And when I insisted and I said, look, guys, this is happening, you have to understand that, immediately they stopped the interview. So they were so upset to hear my determination. Of course, it's not my determination, it's the determination of the Israeli government and the Israeli military. I just express it. When they heard that, look, guys, your end is coming, they were very upset. So this shows you the mood, not only among the Palestinians, but also among Arab countries surrounding us. They are all afraid from this military operation, which is expected. And they know that means the end of Hamas in Gaza. And this is something which is very troubling for them, especially for the Gaza people. And as you said, the Hamas terrorists in Gaza, they are trying to keep the population, the population that remained in the north of Gaza Strip. They're trying to persuade them to stay, and most of them want to go south, but the Hamas is preventing them. They set roadblocks on the main road from north of Gaza to the south, which is called Salah ad-Din Road. And when the people come from the north of Gaza with their cars and their belongings and trying to move to the south of the Gaza, they make them go back. And when some people refuse, they even shot at them. This is testimonies of people in Gaza that are afraid now to go down from the north of Gaza to the south of Gaza because they might be shot by the roadblocks of Hamas. I think the IDF, also the Israeli Air Force, threw a few bombs on these Hamas roadblocks in order to make them go away from this main road of Salah ad-Din. But I don't know, I think they are still there and trying to prevent the people from to move from north of Gaza to the south of Gaza. So I think even though they are working very hard to keep those residents of Gaza as human shields, I think that once the Israeli military invasion will start, the people of Gaza that still a few thousands of residents stayed in that are staying in the north of Gaza, they will run away. They will not care about Hamas. Once they see the Israeli tanks and the Israeli invasion, all of them will take their belongings and escape immediately to the south of Gaza. This will enable the IDF to have a better result in fighting the terrorists of Hamas in the north of Gaza. Every person that will stay in this area after the Israeli invasion started will be considered by the IDF as a terrorist of Hamas. The IDF made it very clear to the residents of Gaza through the media, through the social networks and leaflets that were distributed in Gaza from the air. So they know what to expect. So I think that this is working so far very good. There was a complete surprise by the Palestinians from the Israeli military incursion last night, and this broke the myth that they had that the Israeli army will not dare to go into Gaza. This is a very important thing. The army is not in a hurry to go to invade into Gaza in a full scale of all its forces, because this is the part of the strategy to keep the safety of the Israeli soldiers and let the Air Force do its job and hitting Hamas targets. Yesterday there was a big success for the Israeli Air Force where they managed to hit one of the entrances to the tunnel system in Gaza, and everything collapsed on the heads of the terrorists. And you could see the pictures coming from Gaza. And how do you know that there were tunnels underneath? You see the road which was bombarded coming up. and you see the cracks.
Coming up on either side, and then with a massive crater in the middle that wasn't created by the bomb. Exactly.
So this is an indication that there are tunnels underneath, and this is very important. That means that the Israeli Air Force and Israeli Army, they get more information, and also the targeted assassination of the Hamas military commanders continue. There was also one today in Khan Yunis, and every day it's a slow process, but I think that the army is moving forward, and this is very important. Let's talk about the Northern Front for a minute.
Can you give us a little bit more details about that meeting of Saleh Harouri, Ziad Nakhle, and Hassan Nasrallah?
Hassan Nasrallah met with, as you said, Saleh al-Harouri, which is number 2 in Hamas leadership, and with Ziad al-Nakhle, who is the Secretary General of the Islamic Jihad terrorist organization. They met with him in order to persuade him to increase or to escalate the war against Israel in the Northern Front. And as we know, there's criticism among Hamas on Hezbollah. They expect more from Hezbollah. A few days ago, Khalid Mash'al, who is the leader of Hamas abroad, he gave an interview and he blamed Hezbollah. They are not doing enough to help Hamas in Gaza. And he said in this interview, and I quote what he said, "This is not the way to write history." And you see the criticism of Hamas on Hezbollah. So Saleh al-Harouri and Ziad al-Nakhala, they thought they could put pressure on Hassan Nasrallah to escalate the situation in the north. But he heard them quietly, and he did not give them a clear answer. He keeps everything vague. But from what I hear from our Israeli security sources, he was not so enthusiastic to go to this adventure and escalate the situation in the north. This might be a good sign for Israel, because in the last few days, the Israeli army was very successful in thwarting many attempts of Hezbollah terrorists to shoot anti-tank missiles on the IDF soldiers in the north on the border. And Israel now, it's not a secret what I'm going to say, Israel is now using drones very successfully, and they succeeding in hitting these terrorist squads of Hezbollah before they even have a chance to launch their anti-tank missiles. So this is a very good achievement of the Israeli army. And I think that about, according to what Hezbollah published, about already 50 terrorists killed by the IDF in the north. So this is a good development.
That's definitely a positive development.
Yeah, definitely a positive development. And I think that the Iranians are now waiting. Actually, I think the whole Middle East is waiting to see what will happen on the Gaza Strip, whether the Israeli army will go ahead and have a big operation, a big invasion into Gaza to destroy the Hamas infrastructure. This is at the turning point might be the turning point of the war so far, because what we are witnessing now, Maurice, is a war of attrition. A war of attrition. Iran actually activated all its proxies in the Middle East. They're attacking Israel from different fronts. And they are waiting to see what Israel will decide. The fact that Israel is not in a hurry to go into Gaza has many reasons. Two major reasons to be mentioned are the one is the request of the United States from Israel to delay this military operation so that the Americans could bring in more forces to the Middle East and deploy them, especially the units that protect the American bases in Syria and Iraq, because these bases were attacked by the pro-Iranian militias. And there were at least 30 casualties among the American soldiers. So the Americans want to have time to deploy whatever they want to deploy in the Syria and Iraq. And also the Americans are asking more time from Israel, because there are negotiations going on behind the scenes between the United States and Qatar, and between Qatar and Hamas for another possible release of hostages held by Hamas in Gaza Strip. So these are the two main reasons for Israel delaying the military operation.
And I think there are also additional advantages to the. It's not really a delay to the process that's going on now. I think there is a definite advantage in using and effectively using the Israeli Air Force to really pound all of these military targets that we have, or that the Hamas has and the terrorists have in Gaza on a daily basis, really to destroy as many of their stockpiles of weapons as possible, and their bases and their communications and operations rooms. I think that's part of the integral part of the operational plan. I think there's also much to be gained from the siege on the Gaza Strip, not allowing extra goods to go in, that the terrorists would be able to use them, and to put that pressure all around. At the end of the day, whilst Egypt not opening the border to the civilians is possibly detrimental to them, I think it definitely buys Israel more time, in that it doesn't give the terrorists anywhere to run to either. And so they're stuck there living within this population that I hope and would like to believe, maybe we'll talk about that in a second, Yoni, is understanding what a disaster Hamas and these other terrorists brought upon them. They obviously see it as a success in murdering 1,400 Jews and foreigners and tourists and everyone else. But I think that the civilian population is now understanding that Hamas really did bring upon them a terrible catastrophe. That's something that has to be stressed as well. And I think that that's part of the strategy. There's no reason to rush into Gaza. The terrorists aren't going anywhere. While Israel continues over, in the last 24 hours, there was another 300 bombing attacks. The numbers that I saw from the IDF already this morning were carried out during that period. So it's really also keeping the terrorists up and around and aware and what's going on. And as you said, the targeted killings do continue on. So every one of these terrorists who puts his head up, it's like going with little gophers and a hammer. Every time they put their head up, they are being taken out. That's really a product of
and
Israel's
also
intelligence completely failed on the first day. Our intelligence does seem to be back on track and working again now. A comment that you made that I have to, whatever everyone knows, I'm a lawyer and military law and the laws of war is part of the speciality. I just have to amend one thing, and I know that we would like to think that it's true, but that every person left in the northern side of the Gaza Strip is now a terrorist and will be thought of as a terrorist. That's, I think, what most people would like to believe. Under international law, that isn't exactly the situation, and I know that the IDF operational orders also take into account that you can't necessarily assume that anyone who stayed in the north is a terrorist. There are people, disabled people, for whatever reasons. The few people that did stay there are still civilians, and as long as they don't participate in the hostilities, than they are.
No, the innocent people, residents, when the Israeli army will go into Gaza, they will stay in their houses. They will not go out. Those who will go out, they are definitely terrorists. Those who will go out to confront the IDF, they are considered terrorists, and they'll be dealt with by the army. But
that's exactly the distinction, Yoni, between those who directly participate in the hostilities and those that were simply for force of circumstances were left there. Obviously, the prior warnings were substantive. They were sufficient. They were in fulfillment of international law. And those who stay obviously do pose possibly a higher risk. But I also know that the IDF takes into account the fact that not all of those who stayed are necessarily terrorists, and that's part of the operational discussion. Yoni,
okay.
Do you have? Can you tell us what's going on in? Like I said before, I would like to believe that the Gazans, all now crowded in the south, in 460,000 in allegedly in the UN sites. What are they thinking? Do we know what they're thinking at the moment? I would like to believe that they are somehow unhappy with Hamas. Does that support? Before the war, there was really tremendous support from the Gazan population for Hamas. Has that changed at all? Do we know anything about that?
I think it hasn't changed yet, because they still don't understand the power of the Israeli army. Now, slowly they begin to understand, because they see the force that is used by the Israeli Air Force, and they see the results of the destructions and the casualties. Now they maybe begin to understand, but we must not illusion ourselves. Most of them still support Hamas. And this is something very important. And Hamas keeps encouraging them in different ways that don't worry, this Gaza is a big trap for the Israeli army. And once the Israeli army will go into Gaza, we will know how to take care of the Israeli soldiers and kill them. This is what they promised the residents. And we have to take this very seriously, because, Maurice, this tunnel system, and this was built for many years, actually from 2007 until today, using a lot of money from Qatar and preparing for the big day of the Israeli invasion into Gaza. They prepare it very well. They have a lot of weapons inside the tunnels. They have food, they have fuel, they have everything there. So they think that they are ready to surprise the Israeli army. And this is what they are telling the Gaza people, that there will be a big surprise. We have weapons that we haven't used yet, and we will use them for the first time against Israel, and this will be a big surprise. And, this is still... most of the population in Gaza support Hamas. And this is something we have to take into consideration when we think about the day after. What will happen after Israel will defeat Hamas? Who will rule the Gaza Strip? And will the body that will rule it, the entity that will rule Gaza Strip, will it have the support of the population, or it will turn into something that the population, Gaza population, doesn't want, because they want something else. Anyway, there's a lot of hostility towards Israel, and I don't think that they still understand the disaster that Hamas brought upon them. They're still very proud of the massacre that Hamas committed in the Israeli population, in the Israeli communities along the border with Gaza. They are very proud of this horrible massacre. That shows you what is the nature of the people in Gaza. I think that we don't have to rush and think that now they're changing their minds. It's obviously that Hamas brought a big disaster on Gaza Strip by this attack that he committed against Israel, but they still don't understand that it will take a few weeks until they begin to understand the extent of the disaster of the new Nakba that Hamas brought upon them.
So maybe on that note, Yoni, I would just like to remind our viewers that if you do have questions, please put them in the chat. We have a few questions. I would like to. There's two questions here from Barbara Mazur, which I think bring us and open us up for two additional subjects to consider. I'm going to take the second question first, with your permission, Barbara. Barbara's question was like this: how is it possible the tunnel system was built without UN and UNRWA complicity? So I would like to answer that, if I may, initially, and say that it's impossible. There is no way that UNRWA and its and the other UN organizations in Gaza didn't see the fact that tens of tons and hundreds of tons of the concrete and metal that had been brought into Gaza on the different occasions for the so-called rehabilitation of Gaza was being diverted by Hamas to this tunnel system. They just don't care. They simply don't care. UNRWA has, from the start of really from the start of its being, served one purpose and one purpose only: to really eternalize this idea that the so-called Palestinian refugees will one day flood Israel and destroy Israel as a national Jewish homeland by demographics and democracy. That's what UNRWA does. They claim that there are now some almost 6 million Palestinian refugees that will, as they say, enjoy the right of return. People who have never been in Israel will suddenly flood Israel and destroy it. From that point of view, the UN is clearly aware of what is going on there, and doesn't really care. The statement of the UN Secretary General just now 2 days ago, saying that the massacre happened within the context of. I'm not even going to continue on with that disdainful argument. It's something which is held by most of the UN organizations that operate in Israel. You have to understand that people should understand there are 22 different UN organizations that operate in Israel. 18 of them have a constant presence here, and all 18 of them are hostile to Israel. They write reports. I recently had reason to read a year of reports offered by or put out by OCHA, the Organization for Coordinating Humanitarian Affairs of the UN. And I can tell you, ladies and gentlemen, that if you were to read those reports without knowing the general context, even ardent Zionists would possibly come to understand why people hate Israel so much, because these reports are so venomous, so out of context, and so distorted that they leave no room for any other thought. Barbara, second question. Go on,
I may add to what you said, Maurice, some of these tunnels, they were dug and built near the UNRWA facilities, very close to UNRWA facilities, and the entrances to the tunnels were in UNRWA's property, so that thinking that this will protect them from the airstrikes of the Israeli army, that the army will not dare to bomb UNRWA facility, so they put the entrances to the tunnels in the property of UNRWA.
And if I'm not mistaken, in the 2021 cycle of violence, there were specifically UNRWA announced that it had found a cache of missiles underneath one of its schools, and that was in August, August 11, 2021. UNRWA was condemning the use of the underground infrastructure underneath its facilities. The UN knows, but with, like most things, as I said, they turned a blind eye because they just don't care what the terrorists are doing. Barbara, second question.
You have to remember that the workers of UNRWA in Gaza are Palestinians, and they're collaborating with Hamas. We have to take this into consideration.
Many of them are Hamasniks, and as we already said, UNRWA claims that 3/4 of the population in Gaza are refugees. Therefore, just on a purely statistical analysis, I think it would probably be right to assume that 3/4 of the terrorists who swarmed Israel and carried out the barbarous, butcherous, ISIS-like acts were actually Palestinian refugees who grew up learning and really suckling the hatred of Israel from UNRWA, from the UNRWA schools. That's something that I think we have to assume as well. Now, Barbara's second question, Yoni, takes us into another very interesting field, which I think also has very many operational implications, something that the JCPA in other contexts is dealing with. We won't expand upon it at the moment. Barbara's second question is, why isn't there a concerted effort to an international effort to call on Hamas to unconditionally surrender? Do you think that that's even a possibility, Yoni? Would you see Hamas surrendering?
This will never happen because this is a jihadist terror organization, and they believe in jihad, and they believe in fighting to the death, because you know, the Hamas is feeding them with lies that they will go straight to heavens. All the what's it called, fighters, the terrorists that they will be killed will go to heaven, where they will have each one will have 72 virgins waiting for him in heaven. This is the lie that they sell them, and they believe it. By the way, this is something which is not in the Muslim Quran or in the Muslim Hadith. This is a fake that the terrorist organization like Hamas, Islamic Jihad, and ISIS are providing these terrorists in order to convince them to fight to the end. So I think they will not surrender, and I think it's better for them not to surrender, because this way Israel will be able to kill them, because we cannot let them stay alive, because they will commit more atrocities. So there's only one way for them: death.
I think
death on the way to hell, not more than that.
I think you're right, Yoni. As you know, my background is as a prosecutor of many of these terrorists, and I fear that there are many of them that don't really want to die. What they want to do is to live another day in the hope that they can continue murdering Jews. That is Yehia Sinwar, who, as a murderer, was convicted and sent to life in prison, released as part of the Shalit deal in 2011, and 12 years later, he is in charge of the operation to massacre 1,400 Jews. I think many of these terrorists, Ali Kahdi, as we had previously mentioned, one of the commanders, the platoon commanders of the Nukhba forces in the central area. The Nukhba forces are Hamas's commando units that were really part of the spearhead of the massacre. Ali Kahdi was similarly arrested in 2005 after he murdered his employer. Sasson Nouriel was sentenced to life in prison, but was also released in the Shalit deal. Unfortunately, just to give a picture, the Palestinians count 42 different instances in which Israel has released terrorists as a result of kidnappings or of other incidents along the way. So I think that some of them actually believe that they would just live to fight another day if they get arrested and are released. I would like to believe that that won't be the case, but I think it's something which also needs to be discussed, because that's part of their mindset as well. And I think there is a possibility that we will see not a small amount of these terrorists who claim to want to die, claim to want to be able to die, and are prepared to die. But suddenly when push comes to shove, people like Marwan Barghouti, as everyone will remember, Marwan Barghouti was the head of the Tanzim. He set up Fatah's massive terror infrastructure as part of the terror war, starting in September 2000, when the IDF forces came to arrest him. He quickly surrendered, as did people like Abdallah Barghouti, the bomb maker for the Hamas, responsible for the death of 67 people, or for the murder of 67 people. So I'm not sure that I see these terrorists fighting until the end. I would like to believe that they will do, and we will be able to send them on their way.
They have a death wish. They have a death wish, and I say, let's fulfill their wishes.
Exactly that. That's that's where we are today. I think the day after is something that really is going to have to be something that we're going to discuss extensively. What is going to happen? Really, the situation in the Gaza Strip at the moment, as you said, is that the civilian population is tremendously supportive of both Hamas and its direction. As we saw, we discussed it yesterday, the father of the terrorist who used the phone of one of his victims to phone and say, Dad, what a great thing. I've just murdered 10 people. And the father says, well, wonderful, son. What a great thing you've done. I think that type of support.
It's not only the father and the mother. I heard it in Arabic
as well.
They were joying and praising him for what he did.
Yeah, without question. And so what we really have in Gaza is a situation of intense, there is no other word for it, intense brainwashing and Nazification. And part of that program after Israel wins the war and decimates Hamas will be to embark of that process of denazifying the Gaza Strip and denazifying the population in the Gaza Strip. I don't think that will be easy either, but it's something that the international community will also have to be part of, I think, and to actively participate. We would, I'm sure that Israel would welcome bringing in the European Union, who are obviously so concerned for the Palestinians and their welfare, to join that effort to denazify Gaza. I would like to see possibly the responses of Joseph Borrell saying, well, obviously the EU would participate in that, not allowing that process to again deteriorate into where we are today. And on the other hand, completely and utterly ruling out the option of the failed Palestinian Authority being implanted in Gaza. Just so our audience understands that the Palestinians in Gaza hate the Palestinian Authority more than the Palestinians in Judea and Samaria. In Judea and Samaria, 75% of the Palestinians hate the Palestinian Authority. In Gaza, it's 77%, according to studies published by a Palestinian market research organization. So that idea of sending Mahmoud Abbas, who really doesn't want to be there and is more hated in Gaza than anyone else, to impose them on the Gazans, I think would also not be a viable idea. But that will come to that bridge. We'll cross that bridge when we come to it. In the meantime, we have to first win this war and eradicate Hamas, ISIS, and the other terrorists, including the PFLP, who are constantly trying to continue on their attacks. A word about the hostages. The hostages that we've seen taken include babies and women and children and the elderly. We've seen 4 hostages released, and the discussions that Yoni referred to previously are really about the possibility of bringing about the release of some of the babies. Kfir Bibas, a 9-month-old baby who's being held by Hamas and the other terrorists. The possibility of bringing them back as some type of a deal. The details of that are unclear at the moment, but that's something that we will have to see how that's going to develop, and really the opinions on that are on some levels very harsh. I don't think anyone wants to perpetuate the idea of releasing terrorists for hostages, but on the other hand, there are women, children, babies, and if the price is sufficiently low, I think there are some people who would support that. Just for Julie Strauss, who asked that we just go back over the idea of what's going on with the electricity and the hospitals and the tunnels. What we said, Julie, is that from the start there were complaints and warnings that the electricity in the hospitals in Gaza would immediately run out within days of the start of the war. We are now 19 days in. The hospitals are still functioning. what's happening is that Hamas, even at the opening of the war, had substantial fuel reserves. Those fuel reserves should have been used for the civilian population. They have since then also stolen additional fuel reserves from UNRWA. UNRWA reported that and then shamefully deleted the tweet where they exposed that. So Hamas is stockpiling substantial amounts of fuel. They're not allowing much of that fuel to be used for the hospitals to provide care for the civilians, because they need that fuel to power the ventilation systems in their underground tunnels where they are hiding, where they're hiding their terrorist capabilities, where they are hiding their men, where they are hiding the hostages. So that diversion of the fuel for that purpose is something which specifically aids and forwards their military operations, which is why Israel is in quite a dilemma, and why the demands of the international community claiming that Israel has to and is forced to and has an obligation even under international law, which it does not, to introduce fuel into the Gaza Strip. That's something which it has to be taken in both in the context of what is going on. There is obviously no requirement in international law that Israel provide its enemy with vital resources to continue fighting. That is obviously a misnomer and something which international law does not require. If you would like to just wrapping up comments for today, Yoni, we can wrap up, and that will be it for today.
I think that Israel will not wait for a long time until the military invasion into Gaza will start. There's a small window open to fulfill the American requests, but the bottom line is that Israel is determined to execute this military operation and fulfill the task of topple the Hamas regime. So I think that this military operation might start in a few days, and this is the intention of the political echelon.
So I have to agree with you. I think that there is no way, at least politically, that Israel's government would be allowed to end this war without destroying Hamas, and that cannot be done without a ground operation. And so I believe that will happen sooner rather than later, but without committing to exactly what sooner means. Just for Lisa Corzon, who's also one of our regular viewers, who asked Johnny, I don't know, maybe, obviously my Arabic is non-existent, but just ask the question, what's the opposite word in Arabic of the Nakba? If the Nakba is the catastrophe, what's jubilance? What's a success? Maybe that's the way that we should be describing the program.
Well, the Arabic word is intisar, victory. This is what they want. They think that this was a big victory. The massacre that they made is considered one of the biggest victories. They compare it to the massacre that the followers of Prophet Muhammad made in the Jewish tribes that refused at that time to follow the Prophet Muhammad. There was, the Khaybar battle, and where the Muslims following Muhammad massacred the Jewish tribes. And so this is what they compare it to. So they look at this massacre as a big intisar in Arabic, as a big victory on the Jews, over the Jews.
Just on a closing note, and I promise that this will be the last comment. Well, Yoni just mentioned now this idea of what happened at Khaybar has become a general war call, a propaganda war call of many of the supporters of Hamas around the world. And when you hear this call in these demonstrations, Khaybar el-Yahud, you should know that the meaning is that they're calling for the massacre of the Jews. That's a common misunderstanding, and since most people aren't familiar either with the instance or its use within these demonstrations, when you hear those types of calls, I would recommend that you immediately report it to the local police, because that is a call for genocide, a call for the massacre of the Jews. So on that pessimistic note, we will wrap up today. Thank you very much for joining us again. We will be with you again tomorrow, Friday afternoon at 4 o'clock Israel time. Obviously, tomorrow will be short. 4 o'clock here is just maybe an hour and a half before Shabbat starts. But we will see you anyway for the update. In the meantime, please, around the world with the demonstrations that we're seeing, even on university campuses, please, everyone, just stay safe and pray for our soldiers and for the wounded and for the hostages to come home safely. Have a good afternoon, evening, morning.